This episode of Run It Back Philly is brought to you by Factor Meals. Fresh cooked meals at your doorstep for as little as $11 a meal. That's cheaper than pulling up to the McDonald's drive-thru, baby. Go to factormeals.com/runitback50. Use the promo code runitback50 for 50% off your first box.
Run It Back Philly. No frauds, no fanboys, no intros.
Harden walked, and Daryl's just like, fuck it. Let's swing one more time, and like, the Wizards are rebuilding, and we'll take a crack on just Bradley Beal for Tobias Harris. Or the Bulls want to get rid of Zach LaVine because they don't want to pay his contract. You trade Tobias Harris and whatever for Zach LaVine. Like,
what kind of like return do you think of Bradley Beal gets at this point? You know what I mean?
I don't think it's much.
You don't think it's much?
He hasn't made the All-Star game in 3 years. And he makes $50 million a year.
His last year's 57.
Yeah, like he has the second largest contract in NBA history, I believe. Maybe third. It's like him, Steph, and I think maybe Jokic has a slightly bigger contract. And then guys like Dame and Kat just signed bigger contracts. And you're putting it in the air right now. This is how we finally get off of the Tobias Harris contract. We take a worse contract.
Yeah. There's two guys that are on worse contracts that a team would be willing to, hey, look, it's not what we feel like he's worth, but it gets us off of this contract. So yeah, that's the only way to do it.
The Sixers are in the situation where it's like, well, if you don't make a move like that, you might be done.
Yeah.
Or like, if Maxey doesn't take the leap next year and the Nurse thing doesn't work out, like these are the kind of risks that you're at. You're at the team building stage where you have now lost Jimmy Butler for nothing, basically, James Harden for nothing, basically, Jeremy Grant for nothing, basically, Mikal Bridges for nothing, basically. You have lost every single thing that you've had except for Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah.
And you're not at the point where you can be cheap about things. You can't just be like I kind of think it's very funny because part of me is like, is it redundant to go get a Beal or a LaVine? Because we talked about the importance of passing, and like Beal's would be the best passer on the team.
Yeah.
And he's like a fine passer. LaVine is not a great passer, but like, from a scoring perspective, you would have basically Joel, who is a scoring monster in the regular season, and maybe it could eventually translate to the playoffs. And then you would have 2 50, 40, 90 high volume 3-point shooting, finishing at the rim with Maxey and LaVine around him.
Yeah.
And LaVine is that guy, if you want to talk about a guy that's like a relocation 3-point shooter, tough shot maker. Like, would that be
Maxey as a starting point guard? If LaVine was the return, Maxey would be the starting point guard. How do you feel about Maxey as a starting point guard? This is what we're building the Sixers roster right now. We're building the Sixers upcoming roster right now on the fly. If Zach LaVine is a way that they finally get out of the Tobias Harris contract,
sure.
Maxey point guard.
Well, first off, I think that's fine. I mean, I think that most teams don't really have a traditional point guard anymore. Like, it doesn't really feel like it's a thing as much. I would like to have a better playmaker, or at least role players that were better playmakers than we would have if that were the case. Like, but a lot of teams like run offenses through wings and bigs and shit like that. So like, maybe you don't
need a floor general if you have a creative enough offense, like maybe Nick Nurse's offense is going to be. So then maybe you're right. Maybe Doc Rivers was a floor general. What'd you say? A floor general merchant.
Floor general merchant.
Yeah, maybe he was.
Well, it's also like, now you're, like I said, you're at the stage of team building where you're kind of just taking like Hail Mary moves. And you're just like, all right, well, like, we see this as an opportunity. Like, I know they've liked Zach LaVine before. They tried to trade for Zach LaVine twice before during the Ben Simmons thing. And then they also tried to trade for him back when Morey was first hired at the 2020 draft. So I know, and that was before LaVine really popped off and became an all-star. But like, if you were to build, you would obviously want more playmaking, but if you were to build two offensive players that could fit in a Joel Embiid offense, that aren't elite playmakers. Like, I can't think of a much better fit than like a scoring wing like Zach LaVine and a scoring guard like
Yeah.
Tyrese Maxey that both can handle the ball and play on the ball and play off the ball and run actions, dribble handoffs, pick and roll, all that shit. Like they really do. Like I've been saying for a while now, like I've had this conversation with buddies. Like, I think if Zach LaVine were, and the knee injury stuff worries me a little bit with him, but like if Zach LaVine were in Jaylen Brown's spot on the Celtics, like he would have a much better view around the league. And if you reversed it and you put Jaylen Brown on the Bulls, I think that Jaylen Brown would be viewed a lot worse.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of guys are just dependent on context. Like, if you're not a number one guy, your context is so important. And those guys are both number two guys. So, like, they're both like Zach's a better shooter than Jaylen. He's arguably a better ball handler. He at least doesn't turn the ball over quite as much as Jaylen does. They're similar levels as passers. Jaylen's slightly better on defense, but I think Zach's defense actually has become a little bit underrated. But like, if we had said 6 months ago, oh, we could get Jaylen Brown, but we have to pay him a ton of money, every Sixers fan in the world would say, "Well, do it."
Yeah, we were on that.
And it's like, okay, well then why wouldn't you feel the same way about Zach LaVine? like that's kind of been my whole thing is like, you can't look at players for what their current contexts are unless they're one of the 15 best players in the NBA. There is 15 to 20 guys in the league that are going to thrive in every single context you put them in.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are 20 to 400 players that require context and role. And that's what there are guys out there that like would be seen as much. It's like the same reason why people thought Aaron Gordon wasn't that good and Andrew Wiggins wasn't that good. And then they get put on the right role on the right team and they're perfectly fine. And there are plenty of guys in the NBA that I think are just like that I would love to get on the Sixers.
Yeah, so if you had to predict, is this finally the season where the Sixers trade Tobias Harris? Because whether people want to believe it or not, I think they've been trying to trade Tobias Harris for 2 years, 2 or 3 years.
Probably the day after they signed the contract is the real. I mean, yeah, I think they probably will trade him only because I've been trying to like. I don't even fully understand the new CBA. It's extremely complicated, but teams are going to be looking to get off long-term money this offseason.
Yeah.
There are going to be good players that are traded for way less than you think, and you're like, why is this happening? And it's like, oh, well, because he just signed like $100 million contract last offseason, and this team doesn't want to pay. And like, it's not only are you paying a ton of money to these guys, but also it limits all of your team building shit. Like your access to exceptions goes away. You can't trade future picks at a certain point. If you are going into the repeater tax, like for like multiple years, like the Warriors have done recently, and the Sixers just did that tax dodging move at the deadline. But if they were going into the repeater tax multiple times, their pick would get moved from wherever it is to the end of the first round if they did that multiple years. Which is insane.
Yeah.
Like, and it makes it so that like one, teams aren't going to want to take on long-term money. Two teams are going to be trying to acquire like late first round picks and early second round picks so they can hit on those have cheap contracts on the team. Like, we're entering a new era of team building where like, I think that it's going to be much more important for the margin moves where like you need to nail like your veteran minimum contract, whoever you can get on the exception, your late first round picks, your early second round picks, whatever. And Daryl Morey's really good at that. Like, he's really good at that. And like Tobias Harris might be seen, like we've talked about this, like there's a reason why he might get traded for players who are much better than him, or at least like multiple rotation players that you would have never thought a year ago you could trade Tobias Harris for. And it's because Tobias Harris has a massive expiring salary. Yeah. So like you can and like we all know Tobias isn't going to make $40 million a year in his next contract.
Yep.
He's probably going to make like $18 million.
Mm-hmm.
He's a good locker room guy. And like that's a thing where it's like, hey, we got this guy. And like, he's been in the All-Star conversation before. He's been on good teams. He makes a lot of money this year, but we'll be able to sign him for cheaper next year. And then like, good locker room guy, has been on a ton of different teams, like has been kind of role malleable over the past few years. Like whoever they bring in, they send out, whatever. And I think that basically a team can just be like, look, we can get him on like a cheap contract after this, and then if it doesn't work out, we can just trade him later. Like in this new CBA era, I think teams are going to be looking to try to get much cheaper contracts for role players.
I'm excited. I'm excited. You're making me believe that the Sixers will finally, get out of that Tobias Harris contract.
It's such shitty timing though, because it's like, it's such shitty timing because it's like, look, James Harden drives me insane sometimes, and like he might limit the ceiling of your team, but like, it would have been so nice to get off the Tobias contract when we had a team that we could build around. And like, if Harden walks now, it's like the only advantage could be if we swing one of those trades where we get back like good players. Well,
Daryl's definitely going to be tested